Hello and welcome everyone to AADL TV today. My name is Lucy and I am here with author Ben Guterson, who wrote the Winterhouse Trilogy, which is a series of, I would call them kind of puzzle-filled mysteries that have, to me, a real classic middle grade feel. I just really enjoyed these books and I found myself being pulled right in them for so many different reasons, which I look forward to talking about with you today. But I was wondering if you could start out by just telling us a little bit about the Winterhouse Trilogy.
Well, you sort of nailed one of the key elements there. I really like old-fashioned middle grade books, roughly for ages 8 to 12 or so. And I've always liked a lot of sort of the classics, everything from Anne of Green Gables to Treasure Island to Wind in the Willows. And some of the ones I read when I was a kid, like the Chronicles of Narnia and the Roald Dahl books, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and all those. And so I had that style or those kinds of stories in my mind as I started thinking about writing Winterhouse. And it's a Winterhouse, or the Winterhouse Trilogy, is a story that basically focuses on a girl named Elizabeth Summers. And at the outset of the trilogy, or at the beginning of the first book, she is 11 years old. And through sort of mysterious circumstances, she ends up going to a place called the Winterhouse Hotel for her winter or Christmas vacation. And she's not sure why she's been sent there. She gets a ticket from her mean aunt and uncle, and she can't understand that because they're very poor. And she thinks they're probably trying to ruin her Christmas vacation. But when she gets to the hotel, it's this incredible place. And of course, it's enormous as well. It's 13 stories tall and has hundreds of rooms. And there's a huge library there. And Elizabeth is a big bookworm, and so she loves to read. So having this huge library with thousands of books is a big thrill for her. And but when she goes to the library, she's kind of drawn to a mysterious book, and discovering that book kind of launches her on this adventure in the hotel. She tries to uncover a lot of the mysterious things going on there. And there's a boy about her age who's also at the hotel named Freddie, and they become friends, and they just track down a lot of mysterious things that are going on. And as part of that, there are a lot of word puzzles or codes that they have to work through and solve. And so hopefully that's kind of fun for readers as well. And it kind of demonstrates how clever or inventive both Elizabeth and Freddie are. So without giving too much of the plot away, that's kind of what it's all about.
And what was your inspiration for this story? I mean, you built such a world here, so I'm just wondering what put that idea in your head initially?
Well, really what put the idea in my head was my youngest daughter. She is now 25, but when she was about 8 or 9, one day she said, Dad, let's get some notebooks and go to the little lake by our house, and we could sit there and draw pictures and write stories and have fun. I said, okay, let's do that. That sounds great. So we went there. I live about half an hour east of Seattle. And so it's very mountainous and green, and we live kind of in a forested area. It's really pretty where we live. So we sat by this nice little lake by our house, and I drew a picture, of the mountains in like a hotel or something, and I called it Winterhouse. And on the back of the paper, I started writing a story about a girl. I thought, I'll call her Elizabeth Summers, and she has a mean aunt and uncle, and she goes to a hotel. And I read it, the first few paragraphs, to my daughter, and she seemed to like it. She said, I'll write the rest of the book. And I said, I don't really know anything about writing a book. And, it's just one of those things that happens. And I put the picture away, and I don't think I ever would have thought about it again. But after a time, she asked me if I had made any progress on the book. And I said, I have not at all. But she said, you should write Winterhouse, or my other kids did. And it just sort of became like something every once in a while, my wife or my kids would sort of mention Winterhouse, and you should write Winterhouse. And by the time Natalie got to be about 16 or so, I'd been trying to write other books, but I just thought, it'd be fun to write a kid's book. And I sat down and I thought, I pulled that piece of paper out and I started trying to write a kid's book. And so the inspiration kind of came from my daughter, because she was a big bookworm like Elizabeth, the protagonist, the main character in the story. So I very loosely based the main character on my daughter. But I just thought, it'd be fun to have a kid like all alone in a huge hotel that's a really nice place, but there's also something kind of strange going on there, and there's a big library, and I like to do puzzles and codes. I've always liked that game Hangman or Scrabble and all those kinds of things. I always like playing around with words. And so I just tried to kind of combine everything together to create what I hope would be a fun story for young people or adults to read. And that's kind of the inspiration for it.
It's interesting to say you based Elizabeth a little bit on your daughter, and they are both bookworms. One thing, there were many things I loved about Winterhouse, but one thing I loved was seeing all the titles of middle grade books that I was familiar with. Some classic, like some I read when I was a child, some that are newer pop up. I mean, I think I counted like 12 in the first book. There's probably more, but and I saw it. I don't, maybe I'm not right, but I saw it in a way as a tribute. Like, I don't know if those were books that were important to you. But was there something more you were trying to do with adding all those book titles in?
Well, I thought it would be kind of fun to really hammer home the point of what a book lover Elizabeth was, because you've noticed, I'm sure, she'll often say, oh, that she's in some situation, she'll say, oh, this reminds me of something like Anne and Anne of Green Gables would do, or this reminds me of Mr. Lemoncello's library, or something like that. So I just thought that might be a nice way to sort of flesh out her character a little bit and really demonstrate what a book lover she is. But also, you're right, it's kind of a tribute to a lot of books, both classics from decades ago all the way up through very contemporary books that I have enjoyed myself, because I sort of thought, maybe people will read Winterhouse and they'll encounter these titles and they'll think, oh, maybe I'd like to check out that book myself. So it kind of serves a dual purpose, or maybe even 3 or 4 purposes all at once. So I really hope my book might lead readers to other books that they would find pleasurable.
Yeah. Are you yourself a bookworm? I mean, are you a big reader?
I'm a huge bookworm. Reading's my main hobby. I always have been. I was so fortunate to have a mother and father who were huge lovers of the written word and the spoken word. My father was a very good public speaker, and my mother was a lifelong scholar. And there were always books everywhere all around the house. And I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and they're book lovers themselves. And a couple of them are authors, and so we've all had sort of that love of literature, and I really owe that to our parents. But I love books. I'm one of those people. It's hard for me to think of a more pleasant afternoon than just sort of sitting on my couch with a cup of tea and a good book. It's my main hobby, and I love to read.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's pretty much what I would always like to be doing.
Yeah.
What are some favorites from your childhood, or even from like the middle grade range, that you remember?
Well, when I was in school, like 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, really some of my favorites were James and the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. One called The Phantom Toll Booth. I don't know how popular that is still, but I loved that book. But the one I loved most of all was The House with a Clock in Its Walls. And it kind of faded away for a while, but then it was a movie about 3 years ago, and I'm sure it's got very popular again. My teacher in 5th grade read that book to the class. You know how teachers read at the beginning of the school day or something like that. And I just loved that book. I was just dying every day to get back into class so she could continue reading that story. And I actually returned to that book many times while I was working on Winterhouse, because I thought to myself, what is it about that book? The author is John Bellairs. And I thought, how did John Bellairs write a book that just grabbed my imagination and just like never let go over, literally many decades? And I kind of studied that book when I was working on Winterhouse, because I wanted to try to bring, if I could, some fraction of that magic to my own story. But, and then there's all the classics, everything from Treasure Island to Tom Sawyer. But, a lot of contemporary books I like the Mysterious Benedict Society series. And a lot of kids it's a really clever, fun book series. I look Book Scavenger series by Jennifer Bertman. There's this series Nevermore by Jessica Townsend. I could go on and on, but I read a lot of middle grade, and I really enjoy it. I'm reading Front Desk by Kelly Yang right now, and
Oh
it's a great
yeah.
book. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I love to read middle grade. I don't think I've ever outgrown it. It just, it's sort of, it provides a comfort, but it's also, I don't know, there's just something about a really well written middle grade book.
Yeah.
Um, did you have particular challenges in writing a mystery? I would think that that might be hard to, like, I feel like you placed little clues very well. And I just was wondering how challenging that was to do that.
Well, I think, writing any book is a challenge. Any direction you choose to go, there's going to be all kinds of challenges because you want to make sure you do things right and you can grab your reader and write a book that you can feel proud about and that, all that. But I like books that have elements of mystery in them and elements of a little bit of magic. I'm not huge into like total fantasy where it's a totally different world and there's, like talking animals and all that. I'm not putting them down. I'm just saying that's not really, I don't think I have any facility for writing a book that's that degree of fantasy. I like writing a book that's mostly our world, but there's a little bit of magic in it. So I wanted to have a little bit of mystery to it because I like that kind of stuff. But it is a real challenge to not give too much away, but also not make it like so unclear that at the end everyone's going like, "What was that? I didn't catch that at all." An ideal mystery you'd like at the end of the book for someone to go, "Oh yeah, that's right." Now I see it, and I can't believe I missed it the first time around. Those are the books, the mysteries that I think are really good when someone can retrace their steps and see how everything fits together. So it is a real challenge to put together a nice mystery story.
Mm-hmm. Well, I loved the characters in this book, like Elizabeth and Freddie are the main ones, but you also have filled these stories with a cast of secondary characters who have very distinct personalities. I loved Norbridge. He like made me laugh out loud at times. And the unlikely pairing of Mr. Wellington and Mr. Rajput. And then just, do you have a favorite character to write?
Well, that's actually a good question. They're all fun in different ways. I want to write. If I'm going to be sitting in my room typing up and dreaming up all these things, I want to enjoy the characters, even the bad ones. Like you want to make them bad, like in a good way or an enjoyable way. So they all have attributes to them that were enjoyable to write or work on. I think it's important, especially in middle grade books, really in any book, you want to bring out something distinctive about each of your characters. You don't want them to be bland. So it's a lot of fun to try to invest something of interest or something distinctive in each character. So that's really what I tried to do. I did like Norbridge. Some people have told me, gosh, there's some times when he's a little bit kind of like not so nice to Elizabeth or something. And I kind of see that. My goal with Norbridge was to kind of make him a character who would kind of respect Elizabeth's intelligence and her need to be independent and kind of force her to bring out even more of that and not let her just spoon feed her everything. So sometimes that comes out of him as being a little bit maybe like tough love, but I kind of like that about him. So it was a lot of fun to write that character, maybe in particular, Norbridge.
Yeah, he was really one of my favorites. I feel like the Winterhouse itself is also a character in this book, I would say. Did you have like something in mind when you created it? It's so detailed, and I just think about like, well, I don't want to give a lot away, but places underneath and the library and all the rooms and the candy making factory. And was there something that you had in mind that specifically, or?
Well, it's funny you mentioned it as a character because I've had a number of people mention that to me, and that makes me feel good, frankly, because I wanted to make the hotel seem like this lavish place with just a million possibilities. And I think part of it is I've always been intrigued by locations or buildings or places that seem to just have endless doors that you can enter and go into that have all these worlds. And I tried to sort of put into Winterhouse all the sorts of things I would love to find in just like the coolest hotel you could ever visit, you know, a candy factory, a bakery, a swimming pool, lectures every night, you know, a choir, a big, you know, a hall for music, and a tower with a telescope at the very top. I just thought, you know, if I could create a place that would be just sort of this magical, fun place that I could occupy myself for days or weeks or something, that's what I kind of tried to create Winterhouse as. It's funny because after I was well into the book, I saw this movie. It's called The Grand Budapest Hotel. I think I have that title correct, by Wes Anderson, you know, and I like that director, and he always creates these sort of whimsical movies. And that hotel kind of, when I saw it, I was like, that's kind of the flavor I was trying to bring to Winterhouse, that kind of cool place with all these sort of crazy or interesting things going on. But I love thinking about huge buildings that have all sorts of possibilities inside of them.
Yeah, it's funny when you mention that movie, I can think, oh yeah, I sort of see the and the old fashionedness of like the little bellhop hats and
exactly
things like that. Which also, this leads me to the illustrations in your book, which are just beautiful and really they just seem so apt. They kind of fit the mood of the story. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened, how you found that illustrator, or how that worked out?
Well, I'd like to say I had something to do with it, but truthfully, I had nothing to do with it. The illustrator her name is Chloe Bristol, and she's fantastic. And fortunately, I was really lucky to get on with a really good book company, Holt Macmillan, and a fantastic editor, Christy Ottaviano. And I had made a connection with her through my agent, fantastic agent, Rena Rossner. So all these really great people have really, you know, contributed or actually helped me get to have this book published. But Macmillan, Christy Ottaviano, really located Chloe Bristol. And of course, when I first saw the first drafts or illustrations, I thought, this is fantastic. Chloe's done things like the SpongeBob series and the movie and the Mary Poppins movie that came out a few years ago, and she's just incredible. So I just feel so lucky that someone so talented worked on the books. But I'll tell you something really interesting. When I first saw Chloe's style, I thought, wow, that reminds me of an artist named Edward Gorey. And other people have told me that as well, an American artist named Edward Gorey. And Gorey actually was the illustrator for the book, The House with a Clock in Its Walls, the one that I mentioned earlier. And so there's something very mysterious and interesting about this, that the book that grabbed me when I was in 5th grade, that its illustrations, and then the person who illustrated my book years later, a book fired by this book, The House with a Clock in Its Walls, her style is reminiscent of Gorey's. It's a nice sort of circle that goes all the way around. And Chloe actually illustrated a book last year about the life of Edward Gorey, a picture book. So it's really fantastic. I know, it's so weird how that all happened.
That's really cool. That's a great story. So I don't feel we could talk about the Winterhouse Trilogy without talking about puzzles, because they are such a big part of this book and such a fun part of this book. I thought, I mean, for me, an adult, I really felt like it was an extra, like it gave me a way to participate in your story on another level. Because you kind of want to look at a word ladder and think, well, could I do that with one less word? Or,
right.
So, or you could even try the puzzles on your own somewhere else. So when you were creating these puzzles, well, I have two questions. Like, one is, how challenging was it to come up with some of the puzzles that, like I think of in the second book, the seal, that just seemed very, it just runs throughout the whole book and it's very complex. But then also the second part of that question is, which came first? Like, did you come up with puzzles and work a story around them, or did you slip the puzzles in, or some of both?
Well, to the first question, it's very difficult to come up with these things, but I love playing around with words. So things like anagrams and word ladders and palindromes and the cipher and all these things, it's the kind of way I play around with words in my head a lot, because I like doing that kind of stuff. So I tried to find ways to weave that into the story. I didn't I wouldn't say I started with the puzzles and kind of built from there or went out from there. Um, I wanted to weave them into the story in sort of a natural way. And so it was quite a challenge, but you mentioned sort of like they add an extra flourish or something to the book. And I really do like that. Of course, you noticed every chapter title. In the first book, there's word ladders. The second book, there's anagrams. And in the third book, there's what are called hidden words sort of in the chapter titles. And it does take a lot of time, actually, but of course, it's also a lot of fun. Just like working on a crossword puzzle is a lot of fun, even if it's kind of frustrating sometimes, you know. But I wanted to add all that extra stuff in there. And it's funny you mentioned, you know, the possibility of doing a word ladder in fewer steps than I did, because I've had kids tell me, oh, chapter 25, I got from there to there faster than you did. And that's totally fine. That's part of the fun of it. So I like that extra thing. I like the thought that people might read the book and enjoy the story, but also be looking forward to coming to the next chapter so they can encounter another word ladder or another anagram, because it does add, I hope, a little bit of richness or fun to reading the book.
Yeah, I think absolutely it does. And I think for, many middle grade readers, even like, or readers who are a little reluctant, it's nice to have that draw. It, as you said, like the beginning of every chapter, you want to see where that word's hidden or the word ladder. So I just thought the puzzles were a really fun part of this book. There's in the third book, I think you have the stereograms. Is that what they're?
Oh yeah, like them. It's like a magic eye thing where you get your eyes go a little fuzzy or cross-eyed or something.
And so I've been staring at those like I can't get it. So I'm going to go back to it.
Did you get it? Did you ever get it? Yeah. No. Well, you know, they're hard. Not everyone can not everyone can make them work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But once you get it, suddenly the words seem to hover over everything else.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
Well, no, I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep at it until I can see that.
Don't hurt your eyes now.
Yeah. So what are you working on now? What will we be seeing from you next?
Well, Macmillan has been great to me, or I should say my editor, Christy Ottaviano, has been great to me. She's actually moving to Little Brown right now. But the next book I have coming out with Christy through Little Brown, it will be, is next year. And it's called The Vista Point Einsteins. And it's about a family, their last name is Einstein, and they live in a town like Portland at the beginning, but they move about an hour east to the middle, kind of a very rural area. And they buy a bed and breakfast kind of place. And there's a huge stone tower on their property overlooking a river. And they have 4 kids. And one night the kids are sitting there, it's all dark, and they see lights flashing at them from the other side of the river. And they realize someone is sending them a message, and then the mystery kind of goes from there. And there's another dimension of the story as well, but that's kind of part of it. And then the year after that, I'll have a book coming out called The Hidden Workshop of Javier Preston. And it's about a man, he's 95, his name's Javier Preston, and he's an artist. He lives in a town kind of like Savannah, Georgia. My wife and I visited there a few years ago, and it was so unlike any place I live here in the Northwest. And it's about these 2 kids, a twin brother and sister. And there's this artist, he's 95 years old. And one night they see him way up on top of the Art Institute where he's kind of a recluse. And he might be looking at them, and they get involved in this mystery involving some stolen art and all this. So those are the next 2 books, because again, I like doing sort of mysteries and codes and kids who have to solve sort of puzzling things.
So will those books have puzzles in them as well?
They will.
Good.
They will. It may not be quite as heavy as in the Winterhouse books. It may not rely quite as much on puzzles, but definitely the resolution of the mysteries in each book will rely on the kids having to solve puzzles. That'll be very different from the ones in Winterhouse.
Yeah. So one final question I have for you is what are you reading now? Or have you just finished something that?
Well, I guess I'm either tonight or tomorrow I'll finish The Front Desk by Kelly Yang. I started yesterday.
You told us that in the beginning.
Yeah, I've just been tearing through it. But I read a mix of middle grade and of course more adult books. About a third of my reading is middle grade, and most of it is adult books. I love classics. Really big on like the real old classics, everything from Don Quixote to the Odyssey. I love all that kind of stuff, but I actually just read a bunch of short stories by Vladimir Nabokov. And it's an author I really admire. And I just finished a pretty lengthy, I think it's probably all his collected short stories. It's a pretty big book. And his writing style is just incredible as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, those are some books that I've been reading lately.
Good. Those are great. Well, I don't think I have any other questions. It has been such a pleasure to talk to you. And I just want to say again how much I enjoyed these books, and I can't wait to get them in the hands of some of the middle grade patrons that I deal with at the library, but also even older and adults, because I think that they are really a set of books for all audiences. So I really look forward to seeing the next two books that you talked about when those come out. And it's just been great chatting with you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, Lucy. I really appreciate talking to you, and it's really kind of you to have read my books so carefully and to have enjoyed them. I really appreciate that, and it's great to connect with you and the readers at your library. And as I mentioned, a daughter lives in Detroit, so maybe I'll get over into the library in person in Ann Arbor one of these days again when the world kind of normalizes just a little bit. But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.